as you can imagine, a lot of focus still from various quarters of the world around the death of Pope Francis. Now, he'd also made a historic trip around 2015 when he traveled to Kenya, making his first journey, if you will, to the African continent. Let's talk more about the Pope's relationship with the African continent. Bring in SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena. Good to see you as always, Sophie. And you were able to cover, in fact, the Pope's trips to South Africa, both at a distance and not South Africa, but the continent, both at a distance and more closely. Take us back to the journey, especially in 2015.
Well, the Pope visited the continent in 2015. The first stop was Kenya, where he was able to interact with leaders in Kenya. At the time, the country was facing challenges in relation to what was being characterized as attacks from the people who were being classified as terrorists because of the terror actions in that country. As we know that at some point in time, East Africa, countries such as Somalia and Kenya did experience challenges in terms of security. Somalia is still having those challenges, and he visited Kenya. And after that, he went to Uganda. That's where we were in Uganda. When he visited Uganda, many people were there when he delivered his message. The main message was around peace and security. But before we get into what he said in Uganda, let's take a listen at this insert in 2015, where we had our correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya, covering the visit of the Pope, the 2 days where he met the leaders. And after meeting the leaders, he then met students at the university and ordinary Kenyans. Let's look back.
The plane carrying the head of the Catholic Church touched down in Nairobi just after 5 p.m. East African time. At the airport, he was met by the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and senior Catholic clergy from the region. At President Kenyatta's official residence, the pontiff received full military honors, complete with a 21-gun salute. He comes to a country with 14 million Catholics, a country that has faced ethnic divisions, terror attacks, and political rifts that have threatened to tear East Africa's largest economy apart. President Kenyatta, a Catholic, seeking divine intervention.
As a nation, we want to combat the vices of corruption, which sacrifice people and our environment in the pursuit of illegal profit. We know we must win this war, and it falls on me to lead it. And Holy Father, I ask for your prayer. And I also ask that you pray for Kenya and that God will hear us and indeed heal this land.
His plea coming just a day after he dropped 5 cabinet ministers from his cabinet over corruption allegations, and also in the same week that his deputy sought to clear his name at the International Criminal Court, where he faces crimes against humanity charges. Pope Francis spoke about reconciliation, inclusivity, and religious tolerance.
I encourage you to walk with integrity and transparency for the common good, and to foster a spirit of solidarity at every level of society.
The pontiff also spoke about respect for the environment, indicating that the world faces the greatest environmental crisis in history. At the University of Nairobi grounds, tens of thousands of people cheered and clapped as he made his way through the crowds to celebrate an open-air mass. They braved an early morning, heavy downpour for hours. Hopes and expectations high.
It's the only chance we might have, so we don't mind anything. Even if it rains, we are going to be here and to be united in prayer with the Pope.
I want to see the Pope. I want to listen to him. I want to hear the message.
The sermon centered on the family, humility, and self-denial. He once again focused on the youth.
We are also called to resist practices which foster arrogance in men, hurt or demean women, ignore the elderly, and threaten the life of the innocent unborn. We are called to respect and encourage one another and to reach out to all those in need.
The message resonating with those gathered here. The Pope also met officials from the United Nations to discuss climate change and its effects on the poor, most of whom live in Africa.
Well, that was in 2015 when the Pope visited Kenya. From Kenya, he then went to Uganda. The message was the same in terms of respect for elderly, but also looking after the vulnerable and also issues that are related to ethical leadership. In Kenya, you can see that many people were there. You can look at that woman who said, perhaps this is the only moment. And indeed it was, because today the Pope is normal.
And he was very concerned about inequality around the world. He also had views on economic policy and how that might be changed, if you will, Sophie, to address the needs, especially of the poorest of the poor. Labour rights were issues he talked about, but even taxation that is often unfair to the poor was on the agenda for the Pope.
Yes, in February, he organized a conference at the Vatican where he invited influential people to discuss the issues that you've touched on, and particularly that relates to taxation. And we know that he also, or the Vatican also invited eminent South Africans. Among them, it was the former legal advisor of the former South African President Thabo Mbeki Gumbi and the former South African President, where they made presentations. And at that moment, it is the day, on the day, first day of the conference, that's when the Pope went to the hospital. And we are told that he was adamant, looking forward to deliver his speech at this conference, but the doctors and the medical team and those at the Vatican indicated that it's not possible for him to deliver that important speech at that conference. And he couldn't join those who were there, among them the former South African President Thabo Mbeki and Gumbi, as I pointed out, from South Africa, where they were discussing the issues that are related to injustices when you look at the global economy, and particularly how the poor and the vulnerable are affected, with the former South African President emphasizing the illicit financial outflows on the continent, saying that that money can be used to address the challenges facing the poor and the vulnerable. But he couldn't deliver that message because he had then to go to the hospital, and he stayed at the hospital for a long time until he was allowed to go back to the Vatican in recent time. And yesterday, the last appearance at the balcony, delivering that message, centered around the vulnerable again, particularly those in conflict areas, such as the war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, Sudan, South Sudan, and also the DRC. That was his message, speaking to the world leaders that these wars must come to an end. That was his message all the time. When he was conducting prayers, he was always emphasizing the fact that Palestinians have a right to live in peace, and calling on the world leaders to do something to address the challenges in the Middle East.
And his ascension ultimately to becoming the pontiff was historic. He was the first pope from the global south. Now that we're going to see the cardinals seized with the responsibility of finding or electing the next pope, what are the chances that we may see an African take that position?
It is going to be a strong contestation, because you have people who feel strong that he was too almost like a socialist, you know, in terms of his outlook, not a conservative. And religion, it's all about being conservative. And there's already jostling in terms of the people around the world making their views known on the continent, people talking about the two cardinals from the continent. As you know, that a pope will be elected amongst the College of Cardinals, and it must be someone who is not more than 80 years old. And in this case, they are talking about a cardinal from Guinea, that is Robert Sarah from Guinea, and also another one from Ghana, Cardinal Peter Turkson. That is the African candidates who people are talking about on the continent. But you have many others from other parts of the world, and the debate is on. But at the end of the day, you know, this process, it is the process at the Vatican.
Sophie Mokoena, SABC News international editor, thank you as always.